They didn't kill me that night. They erased me, and that was worse. The ocean wind tasted like salt and champagne as it whipped through the terrace, lifting the edges of my white dress like something trying to warn me. But I smiled anyway, because that's what you do when your life looks perfect from the outside. When your fiancé kisses your cheek in front of donors and investors and calls you the future of the foundation. When your cousin adjusts your veil and tells you everything is finally falling into place. And for a moment I believed her. I believed all of it until my phone vibrated in my hand and I glanced down expecting a harmless message, maybe a congratulations text, but instead I saw numbers. Long, cold numbers, $4,800,000 transferred out of my trust account, processed, completed, gone, and my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat as the music continued behind me. Soft jazz, polite laughter, crystal glasses clinking like nothing had just been stolen from me in plain sight. And I looked up, searching for Adrian, because he would know. He always knew everything about the accounts, the structure, the legal side. He had insisted on helping. Said it made us a team, said we were building something together, and there he was across the terrace, already watching me, already knowing that I knew, and the way he smiled, calm, steady, almost relieved, made something cold settle under my skin. "Hey," he said when he reached me, his voice smooth like we were still in front of an audience, like nothing had shifted. "You look like you need some air," and I let him guide me away from the lights, away from the music, away from everyone who thought this was the happiest night of my life. My heels clicking against the stone as we moved toward the edge of the property where the land dropped into darkness and the ocean stretched out like an endless silence. And I tried to speak, tried to ask about the transfer, about the account, about why my chest felt tight and my hands wouldn't stop shaking, but the words didn't come. Outright, they tangled and broke apart before they reached him. And he didn't rush me, didn't interrupt, just waited until we were far enough that no one could hear, far enough that the party became nothing more than a distant blur of light behind us. And then he sighed like this was inconvenient, like I had forced his hand by noticing too soon. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," he said, and I stared at him, really stared, searching for the version of him I thought I knew, the man who brought me coffee in the mornings, who remembered my schedule better than I did, who told me I was safe with him, but that version wasn't there anymore. And I realized something in that moment that hit harder than fear, harder than anger. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't a mistake. This had been planned, and I was the only one who didn't know. "What did you do?" I finally managed, my voice smaller than I expected, and he tilted his head slightly, almost curious, like he was studying how I would react. "I fixed a problem," he said, "legally, efficiently, permanently." And the word permanently echoed in my mind as the wind picked up again. Colder now, sharper, and I took a step back without thinking, instinct more than decision, because something in me understood before my brain caught up, understood that the ground beneath my feet was no longer safe, that the man in front of me was no longer mine, that I had walked willingly into something I didn't even recognize, and I turned just slightly, as if I might go back toward the lights, toward the noise, toward anyone who could see me, but his hand caught my arm, not tight, not violent, just firm enough to stop me. And he leaned in close, his voice dropping so only I could hear. "By morning," he said quietly, "no one will be looking for you." And for a second, everything slowed. The wind, the sound, even my own heartbeat. And I understood what he meant, not as a possibility, not as a threat, but as a decision that had already been made. And I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but there was no time, no warning, just a shift in balance, a sudden absence where solid ground had been, and the world tilted away from me as the lights of the terrace blurred into streaks above. The ocean rising to meet me in a rush of cold air and silence. And the last thought that stayed clear, sharp, undeniable was this. This wasn't an accident, this wasn't a mistake. They had already said goodbye to me. I just hadn't realized it yet. I did not remember hitting the water. Only the cold that followed, the kind that did not feel like temperature, but like absence, like something inside me shutting down piece by piece while the world above disappeared into darkness. And for a while there was nothing but silence and weight and the distant echo of a life I had just lost, until somewhere far away there was motion, a sound that did not belong to the ocean, steady and mechanical. Tires cutting through gravel, an engine slowing instead of passing, and then voices low and controlled, not panicked, not rushed, the kind of voices that made decisions without needing permission. I did not see them at first. I felt them, the shift in air, the presence of something deliberate moving closer, and then a light cut through the dark, sharp and focused, not searching randomly, but scanning precise like it already knew what it was looking for. And I remember thinking, if this is how it ends, at least someone found me. At least I was not completely erased, but even that thought felt distant, like it belonged to someone else, someone who had more strength than I did in that moment. There a voice said, calm, certain, and footsteps followed, measured, careful, not slipping, not hesitating, and then hands, steady hands, not rough, not gentle either, just efficient, checking for something, pulse maybe, breath, something that would determine whether I was worth the effort. And I wanted to react, to move, to say something, but my body did not answer me. It stayed heavy and still like it had already chosen to give up, and for a second I wondered if they would leave me there, if they would decide I was already gone. But then another voice, deeper, quieter, said something that cut through everything else. She is alive, he said, not with relief, not with urgency, just with certainty, like it was a fact he had already accepted. And the way he said it made the others move faster, more focused, as if his word was enough to shift the entire outcome of the night. I felt myself being lifted, not like I was fragile, not like I might break, but like I was something that had already been evaluated and chosen. And the motion sent a wave of cold through me, so sharp it almost pulled me back into consciousness, almost, but not enough to fully wake me, only enough to catch fragments, the interior of a vehicle, dark leather, the faint scent of something expensive and clean, voices fading in and out as they spoke around me. Not about me, never about me, just logistics, timing, distance. Like I was already part of a plan that had been set in motion the second they decided I was still breathing. Nearest. Facility is 40 minutes, someone said, and then the same voice as before responded, closer now, like he was standing right beside me. We're not taking her to a facility, he said, and there was no argument, no hesitation, just immediate agreement, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who is in charge. And even in that half-conscious state, I understood something important, something that settled deep before I could question it. Whoever this man was, he did not ask for permission. He created outcomes. The vehicle moved, smooth, and controlled, the outside world disappearing completely as the sound of tires on the road became the only constant. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt something that did not belong with fear or pain, something unfamiliar and unsettling, a sense that whatever had just happened to me had not ended at the edge of that cliff. It had only changed direction. I did not know if that was better or worse. I only knew it was not over, not yet. And the last thing I heard before everything faded again was his voice, quieter now, almost thoughtful. She was not meant to survive, he said, and there was a pause, just long enough to make the next words land heavier, which means someone is going to be very disappointed. I woke up to silence that did not feel natural, the kind that was too controlled to be real, like the world had been muted on purpose. And for a moment I thought I was still underwater, that this was what came after the cold, after the fall. But then I felt something beneath me, firm, steady, not shifting like waves, and the air was warm, carefully regulated, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and something cleaner. Sharper, like a place where nothing was left to chance. And I opened my eyes slowly, expecting darkness, expecting pain, but instead I saw glass, tall panels stretching from floor to ceiling, reflecting soft light that made everything look distant and unreal. And it took me a few seconds to understand that I was not alone, that someone had been here, that everything around me had been arranged, monitored, controlled, and the realization settled in before the fear did, quiet and precise. Just like everything else in that room, I tried to move and felt resistance, not restraint, but weakness, my body responding like it had been disconnected and slowly reattached, every motion deliberate, every breath measured, and I became aware of details one by one. A blanket that was heavier than it looked, a bandage on my temple, the faint hum of machines somewhere out of sight, and I turned my head slightly, enough to see the outline of a door closed, solid, guarded not by locks I could see, but by the certainty that it would not open unless someone decided it should. Memory returned in fragments, not all at once, just enough to make my chest tighten. The terrace, the wind, Adrian's voice, the numbers on my phone, the moment everything shifted from normal to planned, and I swallowed hard, the taste of salt still lingering like something I could not wash away, and I whispered the first thing that made sense. How long? My voice barely there, thin and unfamiliar. I did not know if I was asking how long I had been here or how long they had been planning it, because both answers mattered and neither would change what had already happened. The door opened without warning, smooth and silent, and a woman stepped in, dressed in neutral tones that made her presence feel professional rather than personal. Her expression calm, practiced, the kind that did not react unless necessary, and she checked something on a tablet before looking at me. Not surprised that I was awake, just acknowledging it. You have been unconscious for 36 hours, she said, her voice even American clinical without being cold, and I let that settle. 36 hours. Enough time for the world to move on without me. Enough time for news to spread, for stories to form, for people to decide what had happened to me without ever asking me. And the thought hit harder than the fall itself, because it meant I was already gone in every place that mattered. Where am I? I asked, stronger this time, and she hesitated just long enough to tell me the answer was not simple. You are safe, she replied instead, which was not the same thing. Not even close. And I almost laughed at that, almost, because safety had become a word I no longer trusted, a word that had been used to guide me to the edge of a cliff, and I turned my head toward the glass again, watching my own reflection faintly staring back at me, pale, unfamiliar, but still there, still breathing, still something that had not been erased no matter how cleanly they had tried to do it. He will want to know you are awake, the woman added, already stepping back toward the door, and something in the way she said, he made it clear there was only one person she could mean, the voice from before, the one that had decided I was alive without asking, the one that had redirected everything, without raising his tone, and I felt a different kind of tension settle in, not fear exactly, but awareness sharp and immediate, because whoever he was, he had chosen to keep me here, and people like that did not make decisions without a reason. The door closed again, leaving the room exactly as it had been, controlled, silent, waiting, and I stared at the ceiling for a long moment, letting the truth arrange itself in a way I could understand. Adrian had ended my life, at least the version of it that belonged to the world, but someone else had picked up what was left and decided it still had value. And I did not know if that made me lucky or trapped. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was not dead, and somewhere outside this room, someone was already deciding what that meant. Power does not announce itself. It walks into the room and waits for you to notice. And when he stepped in, I understood that everything in this house moved because he allowed it to. The door opened without sound, just like before, but this time the silence felt heavier, intentional, like it was making space for him. I did not turn immediately. I did not rush to look, because something in me already knew that whoever stood behind me did not need attention to command it. But eventually I shifted my gaze, slow, controlled, and there he was, exactly as I had imagined from the voice, tall, composed, dressed in dark tones that did not try to impress, but still did, his presence sharp without being loud, like a line drawn with precision instead of force. And for a moment neither of us spoke. We just observed, him assessing, me calculating, and I realized that this was not a meeting, it was an evaluation. You are awake, he said finally, his voice the same as before, steady, certain, not surprised, and I pushed myself up slightly, ignoring the protest in my body, because something in me refused to look fragile in front of him. I am not dead, I replied, and the corner of his mouth moved just enough to suggest that he found that answer interesting. Not emotional, just accurate. Like I had passed a small test without realizing it. He stepped further into the room, not rushing, not hesitating, each movement deliberate. And I noticed the details now, the way his eyes moved before his head did, the way he took in the entire space without appearing to look around, the kind of awareness that made you understand he missed nothing. And that realization settled into something colder than fear, because people like that did not make mistakes, and they certainly did not make random choices. Do you know what happened to you? He asked, and I held his gaze. Steady this time, because I would not give him confusion. I would not give him weakness. I was removed. I said, choosing the word carefully, and for the first time he reacted, not with surprise, but with a slight shift in posture, like he appreciated the precision. Yes, he said, you were, and there was something in that confirmation that made everything more real than before because it was no longer just my memory. It was a fact acknowledged by someone who understood exactly what that meant. I took a breath, slower now, more controlled, and asked the question that mattered most, why am I here? And he did not answer immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make the moment feel deliberate. And then he said, because you are still useful. And the words landed clean, without decoration, without apology, and I felt something inside me shift again. Not breaking, not collapsing, just adjusting, because I had expected kindness, maybe curiosity, but not honesty that's sharp. And I realized in that instant that whatever this was, it was not rescue, it was selection, useful for what I asked, and he tilted his head slightly, studying me again, as if deciding how much I deserved to know. That depends on what you choose to become, he said, and that answer did something unexpected. It gave me space, not freedom, but space to think, to decide, to exist as something other than what they had tried to turn me into at the edge of that cliff. I looked at him, really looked this time, at the calm control, the absence of unnecessary movement, the quiet authority that filled the room without raising his voice, and I understood something important, something that settled deeper than fear or anger. This man did not operate on emotion, he operated on outcomes, and right now, I was one of them. What are my options? I asked, and his response came without hesitation, like it had been decided long before I woke up. You can disappear, he said, live quietly, change your name, forget what happened to you, and he paused just slightly, not for effect, but because the next part required my attention, you can come back. And the way he said come back was not about survival, it was about impact, about presence, about reclaiming something that had already been taken from me. The room felt smaller suddenly, not physically, but in possibility, like everything had narrowed into a single choice. And I thought about Adrian, about Evelyn, about the way they had already moved on without me, already rewritten the story, already decided I was gone. And something inside me, something quiet and steady, refused to accept that version of events. If I come back, I said slowly, I do not come back the same. And for the first time, there was something in his expression that resembled approval, subtle, control, but they're good, he said. And then, without raising his voice, without stepping closer, he delivered the line that changed everything. Because the girl they tried to erase is already gone. The truth does not arrive all at once. It builds quietly, in the background, until one detail refuses to fit, and then everything starts to shift around it. And that was how I knew something was wrong long before I found proof. Not because anyone told me, not because Damien revealed anything, but because the world he placed me in was too precise to be accidental, too prepared for someone who had supposedly been found by chance on the side of a road. The days that followed were structured without feeling controlled, which was more unsettling than if he had locked the doors, because instead of confinement, he offered access to information, to rooms, to people who spoke to me as if I already belonged there, analysts who walked me through financial maps of accounts I used to think I understood, security advisors who explained patterns in movement, in timing, in decisions that I had never questioned before. And I listened, I learned, I adapted, because every answer they gave me filled in a gap I had not even realized existed. And slowly, quietly, the version of my life I had believed in started to look less like truth and more like something carefully arranged. It was in his office that the final piece surfaced, not because I was searching for it, but because it was there, open, visible, as if it had never been meant to be hidden from me, a file with my name on it. Not handwritten, not personal, but printed, categorized, analyzed, and for a second I just stood there, staring at it, feeling something tighten in my chest as I reached for it, because some part of me already knew that whatever was inside would not feel like discovery. It would feel like confirmation. The contents were clinical, detailed, timelines, transactions, behavioral notes, and at the center of it all, one name repeated in connection with mine, Adrian Cross, flagged, monitored, tracked, not as my fiancé, but as a subject of interest, part of something larger than I had ever been allowed to see. And then the line that changed everything, highlighted not for. Emphasis, but for clarity, primary financial conduit linked to Whitmore Trust. And I stopped breathing for a moment because that was not coincidence, that was design. And suddenly the night of the cliff, the transfer, the calm in Adrian's voice, it all rearranged itself into something sharper, something intentional beyond just betrayal. You found it. Damien's voice came from behind me. Not surprised, not concerned, just acknowledging, and I turned slowly, the file still in my hands, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. You knew, I said, not asking, not accusing yet, just stating what was becoming impossible to ignore, and he stepped further into the room, his expression unchanged, steady, controlled. Yes, he replied, and the simplicity of it hit harder than any denial would have, because there was no attempt to soften it, no effort to reframe it into something kinder. How long? I asked, my voice steady now, sharper, because I needed the full truth, not pieces of it. And he answered without hesitation, long enough to understand structure. And I let out a slow breath, because that meant weeks, months maybe, time in which he had watched, analyzed, predicted, while I had been standing beside Adrian, thinking I was building a future. So what? I continued, taking a step closer despite myself. You were going to let it happen, and this time there was a pause, not uncertainty, but calculation, like he was choosing the exact words that would remain accurate. I knew you were in danger, he said. I did not know they would act that night. And for a moment I just stared at him, because that answer was not an apology, it was not even regret. It was a boundary, a line between what he controlled and what he did not. And something inside me reacted before I could stop it, a sharp movement, my hand connecting with his face in a way that surprised both of us. Not because of force, but because of intent, because I had not planned it, had not calculated it. I had simply acted, and the sound echoed briefly in the silence that followed. He did not move, did not step back, did not raise his voice. He just looked at me, the same calm still there, unchanged, and that unsettled me more than if he had reacted, because it meant he had already accounted for this, for me, for everything I might do. You were watching, I said, my voice lower now, controlled again, and I was just part of the file, and he shook his head slightly, not in denial, but in correction. You were the variable, he said, and I felt that land differently, not as comfort, but as recognition, because variables change outcomes, they shift plans, they create results no one can fully predict, and for the first time since I had woken up in this place, I understood exactly what I was to him. Not a victim, not a responsibility, but something far more complicated, something that could either disrupt everything or become part of something bigger. And the choice of which one I became was no longer entirely his. Trust is not something you rebuild. It is something you replace. And I realized that as I stood in front of him, the file still open between us, the illusion of being protected already gone, leaving only something sharper, clearer, something that felt less like safety and more like alignment. I did not step back. I did not look away, because whatever this was now, it required clarity, not comfort. And I understood that if I stayed, if I chose to remain in this place, it would not be as someone rescued. It would be as someone who agreed to the terms whether they were spoken or not. So what happens next? I asked, my voice steady again, not because I was calm, but because I had decided that control would not come from emotion. It would come from understanding, and he watched me for a moment, not evaluating this time, but confirming something like I had crossed a threshold he had been waiting for. Next, he said, we stop reacting and we start directing. And the shift in that word, directing, changed the weight of everything that followed, because it meant this was no longer about surviving what had been done to me. It was about shaping what would come after. He moved to the table, pulling up a series of documents, not just financial records this time, but identity structures, background profiles, assets positioned across different states, each one detailed, complete, existing as if it had always been there. And I felt a flicker of something I had not expected, not fear, not anger, but recognition, because this was how power operated, not in moments, but in preparation. If you walk back in your old life, he continued, you will not last 24 hours. And I did not argue, because I already knew that was true. The version of me they had tried to erase was predictable, emotional, easy to control, and that version would not survive a second encounter. So I did not go back as me. I said, more to myself than to him, and he inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the conclusion without needing to state it himself. You go back as someone they do not recognize until it is too late, he said, and the way he framed it was not theatrical. It was strategic like everything else, and I stepped closer to the table, looking at the profiles laid out in front of me, each one a possibility, each one a version of a life that could exist if I chose it. You already built these, I said, not surprised anymore, just confirming. And he answered simply, options are always built before they are needed. And I let that settle, because it meant he had prepared for outcomes long before I had even understood I was in danger. And instead of resisting that, I started to see the advantage in it. I reached for one of the files, scanning quickly the name, the financial history, the connections, all of it consistent, all of it believable. And for the first time since I had woken up, I felt something close to control return, not fully, not completely, but enough to change the way I stood, the way I thought, the way I saw what was possible. What do you get out of this? I asked, because there was no version of this that existed without exchange, and he did not hesitate. Access, he said, to places I do not enter directly. And I understood. Immediately, high society, donor circles, events where influence was hidden behind elegance. Places where someone like him did not belong visibly but still needed to reach. And the realization did not bother me the way it might have before, because now I saw it for what it was, not exploitation, but alignment of interests. I closed the file slowly, looking back at him, and for a moment the silence between us felt different. Not tense, not uncertain, but balanced like two sides of something. That only worked if both were fully aware of what they were agreeing to. Then we make a deal, I said, and his expression did not change, but his attention sharpened, just slightly, enough for me to know that this was the moment everything would lock into place. I get my name back, I continued, my money, my life, and you get your access. And I held his gaze, not challenging, not submitting, just stating terms, because that was the only language that mattered here. There was a pause, brief but deliberate, and then he nodded once, precise, final. Agreed, he said. And just like that, it was done, not sealed with anything symbolic, not softened by reassurance, just defined, clear and irreversible. I picked up the file again. The name at the top no longer just a possibility, but a decision. And as I read it, letting the details settle into something I would soon have to become, I felt the last piece of who I had been fall away, not violently, not dramatically, just quietly replaced by something sharper, something that would not stand at the edge of anything again, without understanding exactly where it led. And for the first time since that night, I was not thinking about what they had taken from me. I was thinking about what I was about to take back. Reinvention does not happen in a single moment. It happens in the details, in the way you hold a glass, in the way you pause before answering a question, in the way you enter a room without asking for permission. And by the time I stepped out of the car that night, Claire Whitmore was not something I had to forget. She was something I'd already outgrown. Manhattan looked the same as it always had, polished, expensive, indifferent, the kind of city that does not notice who disappears as long as the lights stay on. And the building in front of me reflected that perfectly, a private charity gala on the Upper East Side, the kind of event where influence wore designer labels and conversations were measured in donations instead of truth. And I adjusted my coat slightly before handing my invitation to the attendant. Not because I was nervous, but because every movement mattered now. Every gesture was part of the identity I had chosen to become. Celia Vaughn, I said when he asked for my name. My voice steady, softened just enough to match the background I had memorized: Boston, private equity connections, quiet wealth. And he nodded without question, because everything about me supported the story, the documentation, the demeanor, the confidence. That did not need to prove itself. Inside, the room was exactly what I expected: marble floors, soft lighting, conversations layered on top of each other like a carefully composed performance. And I walked through it without hesitation, not scanning for danger, but observing patterns: who stood where, who spoke first, who deferred, who controlled without appearing to. And it felt different now. Not overwhelming, not distant, but readable, like a language I've finally learned how to understand. I took a glass from a passing tray, not because I needed it, but because it gave my hands purpose, and I let my gaze move naturally through the room until it found what I'd come for. Not immediately, not obviously, but inevitably Adrian Cross, standing near the center, surrounded by people who believe in the version of him he had created, composed, respected, untouched by anything that had happened weeks before. And beside him, Evelyn, poised, elegant, wearing confidence like it belonged to her, like she had always expected to stand exactly where she was standing now. And for a moment, just a moment, something old tried to surface, something tied to memory, to betrayal, to everything they had taken, but I did not let it stay. I did not let it define what came next. Instead, I moved closer, not directly toward them, but into their orbit, entering conversations that overlapped with theirs, allowing my presence to register without demanding attention. And when Adrian finally noticed me, it was not immediate recognition. It was curiosity first, the kind that comes when something feels familiar but does not make sense. And I held his gaze for just a second longer than necessary, enough to plant doubt, not enough to confirm it. And then I looked away, continuing the conversation I had stepped into, as if nothing had happened. "You are new," someone beside me said. A woman with a practiced smile and eyes that measured value before interest, and I returned it easily. "Boston does not travel as often as it should," I replied, my tone light, controlled, and she laughed softly, accepting the answer because it fit, because it made sense within the world we were standing in. I could feel Adrian's attention now, not fixed, but returning again and again, trying to place me, trying to understand why something about my presence disrupted the version of reality he was comfortable with. And that was exactly where I needed him, uncertain, searching, off balance without knowing why. Evelyn noticed too, her expression shifting just slightly when our eyes met. Not recognition, not yet, but something close to it, something instinctive, and I smiled at her, polite, composed, the kind of smile that revealed nothing and suggested everything at the same time. I did not confront them. I did not reveal myself, because this was not about shock. Not yet. This was about control, about entering their world without permission and letting them feel it before they understood it. And as the evening moved forward, as conversations shifted and attention followed influence, I realized something that settled deep and steady. This room, this world, it had once defined me, shaped me, limited me, but now it was just another environment, another structure to navigate, another system to use. And when Adrian finally stepped closer, his voice careful, measured, "Have we met?" he asked. I looked at him fully for the first time, not as the man who had ended my life, but as a variable I intended to control, and I tilted my head slightly, just enough to suggest consideration before answering. "I do not think so," I said, and the truth of it was sharper than any lie, because the person he had known no longer existed, and the woman standing in front of him was not someone he had ever met before. The most dangerous truths are never spoken out loud. They reveal themselves in patterns, in small inconsistencies that only make sense once you stop looking at people as who they pretend to be and start seeing them as what they need to hide. And that was what changed everything. Not a confession, not a confrontation, but a detail that refused to disappear once I noticed it. The gala continued around me. Conversations flowing, glasses refilling, music soft enough to never interrupt power, and I stayed exactly where I needed to be, close enough to observe, far enough to remain unremarkable, letting Adrian circle back toward me without realizing he was doing it, letting Evelyn's attention drift in my direction more often than coincidence would allow, and I responded to both with the same controlled distance, polite, measured, never inviting, never dismissive, because the goal was not to engage, it was to destabilize. It happened when Evelyn stepped away from the group, moving toward a quieter section of the room where the lighting dimmed just slightly and the conversations shifted from public to private. And I followed, not directly, not obviously, just adjusting my position within the flow of the evening until I was close enough to hear without appearing to listen. And her voice, soft but precise, carried just enough for fragments to reach me. Numbers, timelines, confirmations, words that did not belong in casual conversation, and then one phrase that locked everything into place. The transfer cleared before midnight, just like we planned, and my hand tightened slightly around a glass I was holding, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for me to feel the shift inside, because that was not new information. It was confirmation that what had happened to me was not a reaction, not a sudden decision, but a sequence executed exactly as intended. I did not move closer. I did not interrupt. I let her finish, let her step back into the main room as if nothing had happened, as if she had not just casually referenced the moment my life had been erased. And when she turned, her eyes found mine again, sharper this time, more focused, like something in her was starting to connect the pieces she could not yet name. Adrian joined her seconds later, his posture controlled, his expression composed. But I could see it now, the subtle tension beneath it, the way his attention flickered between me and the conversation he was pretending to maintain, and I realized something important in that moment. Adrian was uncertain, but Evelyn was calculating. I shifted my position slightly, stepping into a conversation near them, allowing my presence to exist within their space without forcing it. And when Evelyn spoke again, this time directly to Adrian, her tone lower, more deliberate, I caught another piece. You said there were no loose ends, and Adrian's response came quickly, too quickly. There are not, he said, but the confidence in his voice felt constructed, not natural, and that was when it became clear Adrian had executed the plan, but Evelyn had designed it. The realization settled in slowly, not as shock, but as something colder, something more precise, because betrayal from him had been personal, expected in hindsight, but this was structural, strategic, something built over time with intention and patience. And I looked at her again, really looked this time at the calm in her posture, the control in her expression, the absence of hesitation in the way she moved through the room, and I saw it clearly. She had not just taken part in what happened to me. She had orchestrated it. Memory shifted again, rearranging itself around this new truth. The time she had insisted on handling certain details, the way she had asked about my schedule, my account, my plans, always framed as concern, always positioned as support, and I felt something inside me go completely still, not breaking, not reacting, just aligning with what was now undeniable. I did not confront her. I did not reveal anything, because this was not the moment for that. This was the moment for understanding, for seeing the full structure of what I was facing. And as the music swelled slightly, as the room continued to move around us like nothing had changed, I realized that the story I had been telling myself since that night had been incomplete, because I had thought I was dealing with betrayal driven by greed or emotion, but this was something else entirely, something colder, something calculated, something that did not just want what I had, but wanted to remove me completely from the equation. Evelyn glanced at me again, her eyes narrowing just slightly this time, and for a brief second, something passed between us. Not recognition, not yet, but awareness, the kind that exists when two people understand there is more happening beneath the surface than anyone else can see. And I held her gaze calm, steady, letting her feel just enough of that awareness to plant doubt, because doubt spreads faster than truth when it has the right conditions. I turned away first, not as retreat, but as control, because I had already taken what I needed from this moment. Not revenge, not yet, but clarity. And as I moved through the room, blending back into the rhythm of the evening, I understood something that changed the way I saw everything that would come next. Adrian may have pushed me, but Evelyn had decided I needed to fall, and that meant the game I had stepped back into was not about confronting one enemy. It was about dismantling a system that had been built to erase me completely. Sometimes strength does not look like standing tall in a crowded room. Sometimes it looks like walking away before anyone realizes you were the one holding the balance together. And that was what I did, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the same control precision I had learned to carry through every movement, leaving the gala behind as if it had given me nothing, when in reality it had given me everything I needed. The city air felt different when I stepped outside, colder, sharper, cutting through the quiet hum of control conversations I had just left behind. And for a moment, I stood there, still, letting the weight of what I had learned settle into something I could carry without breaking under it, because this was no longer about what they had done. It was about what I was going to do next. And that required clarity, not reaction. The car door opened before I reached for it. Silent, precise. And I slid inside without hesitation, the interior dim, familiar now in a way that felt less like confinement and more like alignment. And he was already there, exactly where I expected him to be, not asking questions, not demanding explanations, just watching, waiting like he already knew that whatever I had found tonight had changed something. You stayed longer than necessary, Damien said, his voice calm, observant, and I let out a slow breath, leaning back slightly as I replayed the evening in my mind. Not emotionally, but structurally, piece by piece, like a sequence I needed to understand completely before moving forward. It was not just Adrian, I said finally, my voice steady, not heavy, because I'd already processed the shock, already moved past the need to react, and his gaze shifted slightly, sharper now, more focused. No, he replied, not surprised, just confirming what he had likely already suspected, and I turned my head toward him, meeting his eyes fully. It was Evelyn, I said, and the name settled between us with a different kind of weight, not louder, not more dramatic, but more precise, because it changed the entire structure of what we were dealing with. There was a pause, brief, controlled, the kind that meant recalculation rather than hesitation, and then he nodded once, almost to himself. That makes more sense, he said, and the simplicity of his response did something unexpected. It removed the last piece of uncertainty I had been holding on to, because if he accepted it that easily, it meant the pattern fit. It meant the system I had uncovered was real, not just something I had constructed from fragments. I looked down at my hands for a moment, not because I felt weak, but because I needed to ground a realization in something tangible, something real. And then I spoke again. Quieter this time, not fragile, just honest. She planned it, I said, and that was the part that lingered, not the betrayal itself, but the intention behind it, the time it must have taken, the calculations, the decisions, all made while standing beside me, smiling, supporting, waiting for the exact moment to remove me completely. The car moved smoothly through the city, the lights passing in soft reflections across the window, and for a while neither of us spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been understood, and I realized something in that silence, something that shifted the way I saw him, because he did not rush to fill it, did not try to guide my reaction or control my response. He allowed it, allowed me to process, to adjust, to arrive at the next step on my own. And that was not kindness, it was respect for the outcome he needed me to reach. What do you want to do? He asked eventually, not telling me, not suggesting, just asking. And I turned my gaze back to him, steady, clear, because for the first time since this had all begun, I had an answer that did not come from emotion, but from intention. I want them to feel it, I said, and he watched me for a moment, measuring the words, the meaning behind them, and I continued, not louder, not more intense, just more precise, not fear, not yet. I want them to feel uncertainty, the kind that makes them question everything they think they control. And there was something in his expression then, not approval exactly, but recognition, like he understood that I was no longer reacting to what had been done. I was designing what would happen next. He leaned back slightly, his attention still fixed on me. Good, he said, and that single word carried more weight than anything else he could have.